we've got to talk about a pressing issue that is impacting the World of Warcraft community with our boy Farak.
Farak.
Yes, it turns out
He's still alive.
Farak is still alive for too many people, and he has not been nerfed enough. Now, this kind of brings us to one of the main points that we talked about in our Mythic raiding video. That, from a research perspective, was of course led by our Mythic raider who is on our team. So, yes, basically, Farak's nerfs have stopped. It haven't happened. It's been a month. There's been no more nerfs, and that's weird because usually what happens is, well, there's the launch tuning, which is meant for Liquid and Echo. Then they basically just nerf everything until an acceptable number of Mythic Plus guilds get over the hurdle.
Yes, Blizzard's design team, also known as the goalpost movers.
Yes. So it really appears the goalposts are stubborn, Matt. They're not moving.
Yeah, they finally actually begun to operate as goalposts, just a little bit late. And
yes,
I know
it's
that's
punishing, per squishy anyway, it's a punishing fight.
Yeah, and I'd say that obviously from the perspective, like it comes across like, oh, well, now it means something that the goalposts are steady, but based on like feedback and stuff, it seems like they just absolutely scuppered the difficulty curve of this raid entirely, as they've been doing with like recent raids on Mythic, where it's just, and you walk over the first like couple bosses, and then the end is just a massive wall where they put all the effort and difficulty in.
There's a lot of variance within Mythic. A hell of a lot, like time, like in terms of boss number, in terms of time, what month you do a boss. It's very weird. It's weird to the point where I think, well, I mean, obviously we don't think Mythic is particularly fit for purpose. One of those things I think we definitely think it could be a larger thing that more people could be interested in. There's probably a version of it where they don't have to continually nerf it from the Race to World First version to the version that most people will actually clear. Because what's weird about that is people might put in, 200 pulls, but actually the thing that gets them to kill is the nerf. And that doesn't...
awful.
Yeah, but the thing that motivates Blizzard to do the nerf is that people can't kill it. So they intentionally do make it so that their nerf achieves the kill for people, which is, then pretty damn weird. So, it's bizarre. Mythic Farak has not been nerfed in a month. Here's an r/wow post from somebody who's... they're back to 400 plus pull bosses, a huge morale killer. Let's see what they say. This may get taken down, but God, I have to post it somewhere. Especially now seeing Season 4 stuff is being blasted out and the constant tuning for Plunderstorm being put out. Please nerf this boss. It's becoming exhausting at this point. I'm not saying take a bat to his knees. But even nerfing Blaze damage to smooth out Phase 1 or something. Even looking at Vault and Aberrus by this time last year, the number was 1,105 cutting edge, and Vault was 1,350. There's currently 742 kills for Farak, which is, that's just over half of where we were at the same point of time with Vault. I think that's really interesting because, of course, if you're a heroic raider, you'll know that Farak is a total cakewalk as compared to Razageth.
Can I stop you for a very brief second?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
Continue then. Yeah. There's something really weird to me in the fact that someone talking about and this is just a completely errant thought. So someone trying to fight the boss is able to look at the data and see how many people have actually fought the boss. This feels like a level of meta engagement that God never intended for video games.
I don't think any form of higher being intended any of this.
Yeah, I'm...
and if they did, I'll have questions.
Yeah, I feel... very, very aggressive ones. I feel there's... And I guess this is the core problem here is you see that people are talking about difficulty in terms of how many other people have killed it. And then you get to turn around and you're like, hang on. The hand of the designer... And this is no longer an immersive video game experience where you're trying to kill a hard boss. It ends up being a weird dance back and forth with these faceless, nameless developer entities that you're make this slightly easier because it's too hard for me. Actually, hang on, but make it hard enough for me. But across this entire sliding scale, instead of them just going, and here's the flag in the ground, reach the flag or you fail. And it feels really it feels like we're so used to this this kind of way of going. And even you look at it in like the ARPG kind of side of things, and there's constantly like feedback back and forth about like hyper specifics. And it's like, man, when did video game players all end up being armchair designers? And like that usually comes with an element of like a derogatory use. Because it's like, oh, well, you're not an actual real game designer. Obviously, in this case, people are very clued in and they do understand like what's going on, and like some of this feedback and stuff is actually generally quite valuable. From a valuable perspective. It's like they say about like players are usually very good at determining the problem, but not very good at determining a solution. But being able to determine the problem is a good skill set in and of itself. And I'm just kind of watching this going, I'm happy enough to turn around and be like, heroic should be a little bit harder. But as soon as you start being like, I can't beat this boss, and I'm investigating the stats on how many people have, I'm like, Jesus, that feels so meta. It feels like that. It feels like the designers have let that kind of, I don't want to say element of community like it's a bad thing, but the fact that people feel the need to do that and feel the need to like almost micromanage from a community perspective everything.
So
it feels kind of degen in a weird way. It's like, if the difficulty was fine, no one would have to do this or post like this.
Yeah. So let's just go to some stats. So if you go down on our document, we'll basically see what these stats are looking like. So you can see that there's 768 kills in Farak with 763 progressing. Now, at the same point in the previous season, we had 1,672 Sarkarath kills and 1,141 people who were... Oh, no, sorry. That's final kill count versus kill count on the... Okay, yeah. So to compare the 20th season numbers then, yes, Farak, 768. For Aberrus, again, week 20 to week 20, it was 1,141. For Vault, 1,544. It's kind of interesting when you think about what the final kill counts were. So your final kill count for Razageth was 1,709. For Sarkarath, it was 1,672. So really a very, very small decay. But if we then take a look, at Aberrus, we see there's a lot of people progressing in Smolderon, a lot in Tindral, a lot on Farak. So currently... Okay, to look at, say, the penultimate boss, 679 people progressing on Tindral. For Echo, again, interesting. Yeah, so the 20th week kills for Echo were 1,869, whereas right now for Tindral, they're 1,531. You're seeing like a little bit of decay, but it's mostly Farak, it seems.
Yeah,
Tindral did get big nerfs. Yeah, fairly interesting. There's been a lot of people talking about sustainability of Mythic.
Yeah, I think that's probably like one of the biggest questions they have to answer yet as like a developer, I think internally in the raid design team is what are they actually doing with Mythic? Because I feel like if the War Within has the same issues, they're probably going to do like, at least if there's no promise to solve early, I feel like the Mythic community is just going to kind of dwindle and dawdle and end up kind of being bled out to the point where you would have to see internal questions but answered of like, or asked rather, is it worth bothering with Mythic? Because clearly it's like, that's where so much effort of the raid encounter team goes. And clearly like, it's their game. If they think they want to do a Mythic thing, obviously that's their right as the game developers. Of course they can do that. Even if it's like a small portion of player base, that's fine. But it does lead you in the question of like, what's the point?
Yeah, is this the best form that it could be in?
Yeah,
especially considering that Mythic itself is something that changes a lot.
Yeah, could they make it substantially easier or split into another difficulty under the duress of it's one more difficulty to support, but they can kind of just say whatever. It's there's Mythic, which is heroic but harder, and then there's challenge mode, which is where the real hard game is.
I don't know. Maybe that would be the thing to do when we actually take a look at this though. Say Mythic Plus that has grown. Right, Season 3 of M Plus has grown versus Season 1 and versus Season 2. Whereas looking at the penultimate kills, again, how they have decayed, and this is all like for like, week 20, Diurna, 2346, Echo, 1869, Tindral, 1531. Yeah. All smaller. And again, for our boss final kill counts, those have degraded, but they've degraded by far the most from Aberrus to Emir Drasil. Yeah, kind of weird because like Emir Drasil was a really great race. It challenged both of the big guilds really well. It was an amazing race. There was so much just the drama that you want in a competitive event. Everyone was singing its praises. But now that it's actually trickled to the main player base, certainly there's more mixed opinions. I guess it's just challenging because these bosses with the gear that the guilds who are doing them right now have, and with the tuning right now, if that's what this all shipped with, then it probably would have been melted by the big guilds.
Which is
a challenge for Blizzard.
Yeah, and Spectre has a good point because remember Ian actually said in an interview that like nerfing the Mythic raid bosses continually wasn't part of what they wanted to do.
Yep.
And they were like tired of doing that. So I guess they got tired of it and just stopped.
So that's where it's interesting. So there's things like those sort of single, one person fails and everyone dies. They said they would have way less of those. And that hasn't really came to pass. There's just a few things that were said after Sepulchre of the first ones, and it doesn't seem that all of those things have made it through. Or maybe haven't made it through as much as some people would want. Some, not all.
Yeah.
I can't speak for everybody.
Kind of funny because they would say, well, we don't want these things that just kill you and kill one person to wipe it. And then you go, yeah, but that's where the difficulty comes from because it's substantially harder to have difficulty in other ways. Yeah. It's the kind of like, how do you make something literally hard? Because there's white damage and guaranteed damage, you can't actually just like design something that's really hard without it just killing people outright. So then you kind of go, well, what's the toolkit? And this where you look at the weak aura problem and you go, well, sorry, every time we try to make anything vaguely complicated, you just solve it by having a load of people basically logically solve the problem immediately and get weak auras to remove the execution barrier or remove a substantial portion of the execution barrier by having weak auras kind of command people on the fly instead of like the version of where you have to keep it all in your head and figure it out as you go. And I think they might actually be starting to run up against the wall of how do we make this hard but not frustrating? I'd almost even suggest a comparison to like a different game genre entirely. You start thinking about the Souls games and you go, well, how did they make Elden Ring bosses harder than say Dark Souls bosses? They made them massive pains in the ass because I don't know how many of you have played a variety of Dark Souls games and also Elden Ring. I'm sure a lot of you played Elden Ring, but you'll notice if you go between the games and a huge amount of how like bosses in Elden Ring hit you is because they vary their attack timings massively and they home like crazy. It's like the first fight against Margit just before Stormvale Castle. And that took me a long time because I'm a seasoned Dark Souls player, and every time I press the roll button because I know when an attack's coming, he just decides I'll just hold my attack for another 10 frames. I'm like, bro, what? That's not what the lead of that animation was telling me. And then I went back and played the first Dark Souls and I was like, this game is easy as piss. Why is that? Because when a boss goes, I'm pulling my arm back, then they'll just swing at the normal time you expect. So I think there's like a little bit of that going on where they like, how do you make it harder but not making it more frustrating? Or like, how do you meet a player that skill is rising rapidly without just shooting them in the head? And you go, actually a genuine design problem, which is fun. Obviously, Elden Ring gets around that by throwing players full of amazing tools, but can the game kind of do that? Because then you run into utility problems. And you go, well, actually, if the boss does crazy shit, but we give you crazy shit to counter it, then we run into the problem of, well, which class has the crazy stuff? And I'm thinking specifically in this terms of like utility, in terms of like Typhoon or Souls Vortex. Razageth is a fun example of that, where Razageth was insane. Razageth was just like, sorry, I'm pushing you off this platform and there's nothing you can do about it. So how did the Mythic Guilds respond to that? The Mythic Guilds went, right, well, we actually need to have life grips for days. We need life grips for days. We need 200 stampeding roars, or, we need you're a holy paladin. well, we actually need evokers to grab you and priests to life grip you because divine steed isn't enough to keep you on the platform. And then that was like a really good idea, theoretically. But then they went, well, now we need a fixed comp. And you're like,
no, our design got in the way of our design again.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the kind of stuff that just like
hate it when that happens.
Yeah, that's the stuff that like keeps happening in this. So I can see how it's like literally a challenge to not have these be numerically difficult. Because you're dealing with the weak aura problem. You're dealing with you have to be able to solve it with a good comp.
Yeah.
Not to mention you also need the numbers to match with a good comp. So you can't say, well, here's the optimal comp for DPS and healing and tanking. But also you have to destroy that comp because you need, 6 evokers to lift people around or whatever else. You can see how it's... They have a hard job.
Yeah, they do.